folks, Jim Simpson here, formerly known as Jim March. It's important I say that because I'm not here to talk today about trucking. I'm here to talk about elections. And a lot of the stuff I did involving elections took place before 2013 when I married my wife Dana Jill Simpson and changed my last name. So most of what I did related to elections was under the name Jim March. So if you're looking for my credentials, look up what I was online, you can find me under that name. The reason I'm coming to you today is because a lot of fights over elections are happening now all over the country. There's both legislative and court battles going on with elections in Georgia, Texas, and God knows where else. The Mueller report has hit like a bombshell, as it should. I'm going to give you a little bit of background to the Mueller report. My wife came forward to talk in 2007, 2008 range about Republicans that she had worked with previously and how they were doing some bad things. Now, when she blew the whistle, including on 60 Minutes in 2000, I believe that was early 2008, when she did that, the part that everybody was worried about was the Siegelman affair, the wrongful prosecution of Governor Don Siegelman of Alabama. However, when she talked to 60 Minutes, most of what she talked about can be quickly summarized by, "The Russians are coming." That's what she said. Now, she wasn't talking about them invading our election system yet, okay? The first wave of Russian meddling into the American political system did not attack our elections. It attacked the integrity of our politicians. They would take particular politicians and involve them in what may have started out looking like an ordinary business deal, but very quickly started to involve what can only be described as the Russian mafia, or other criminal elements that might as well be the same thing. And as they dragged American politicians deeper and deeper into shady business dealings, they compromised them. And the list of people they compromised was astounding, honestly. So, where does that leave us now? Well, now they've taken a more overt approach, according to Mueller. I'm talking, and I'm going to be talking for an hour, by the way. You may see me glance to my right once in a while. That's where I've got an hour-long timer countdown going. So I know about where I need to be, where I am in this subject. I'm talking to a general audience, yes, however, also to the activists that are on the front lines in Texas, in Georgia, and other places that these legislative battles are happening, including the halls of the federal Congress, in the various state halls, and in various court actions. You need to know what's really been going on in the election integrity movement going back to at least about 2003 when I first got into it. What kinds of things have myself and other old school experienced activists seen? What kinds of election fraud are out there? What kind of system vulnerabilities are out there? And I also have some thoughts on where we should be going into the future and why this is still such a problem today. We've known, well, let's back up. 2003, okay? Bev Harris was writing a book on the theoretical dangers of electronic voting machines. You've got a computer, it's programmed by who knows who, that's going to count your vote. And you're not allowed, even back then, you are not allowed to know exactly how that count happens inside the machine, because the source code that machine's programmed by, the way that machine operates, is opaque to you. It is a trade secret, and the source code is held under copyright. That's a problem. Now, back then, there was a very primitive structure in place, legal structure and practical structure, that was supposed to monitor what voting machine companies were doing. There was a certification and testing process. There was supposed to be a federally managed agency of some sort that was supposed to check out voting machines. And they would do that based on lab results that came from private testing labs, okay, private companies, that the voting machine companies would hire to check out their stuff under contract with the voting machine vendor, but then write reports that go to this federal agency, and the federal agency would sign off on the reports, and now you have a certified voting machine that is allegedly fit for purpose, tested, approved, and safe, and so on and so forth. Yeah. Well, that whole system has been a failure from day one. Bev Harris, as I told you, was writing a book on the theoretical dangers of all this. Well, in January of 2003, she came across a website run by one of the biggest voting machine vendors, Diebold. Diebold had swallowed a smaller company called Global Election Systems, and then they'd formed a Diebold Election Systems division by taking Global just into their wing. Okay. There were all kinds of product manuals and test results. There was actual running copies of programs. There were data files making up a complete election structure, including live election data from a number of jurisdictions. There was a manual that was marked not for customer use. That was how Diebold Election Systems told their own staff to behave when they were on site at an election agency, including saying things like, oh, if you're coming in from Canada and going to run a U.S. election in some county, don't tell Border Patrol that you're coming into the U.S. for work. Honest to God, that's in there. This caused all kinds of scandal because there was some really nefarious stuff in it. Sometime in the, I want to say late summer of 2003, somebody released over 10,000 internal emails spanning the late Global Election Systems and early Diebold Election Systems periods. In two of them really stand out as cases where management at this same organization under two different names, management told underlings to lie to the federal test labs. Okay? In one case, they told them to withhold customized software. The rules say that, at least at that time, and I think they still do, that if you have a commercial off-the-shelf COTS, C-O-T-S, software product that you buy to include in your voting machine, you don't have to disclose all the source code. Questionable, but okay. Well, they used a copy of something called Windows CE, Compact Edition. And Windows CE has to be customized by the vendor to make it work on your particular hardware. That's why it's so cheap under a Microsoft license. So Diebold, Global originally, then Diebold, took a copy of Windows CE and heavily modified it for their own gear, then passed it off as COTS. They could have slipped whatever nefarious stuff they wanted in there. Shouldn't have been able to do that, but they did. And you actually had the memos from management telling underlings in this organization, Diebold/Global, whatever, to lie to the test labs. Another place they told them to lie to the test labs was, at some point, somebody figured out that, we're going to talk technology for just a second here. When you run a vote, when you count the votes in a particular county, you have county-level voting machines, and they might be scanning pieces of paper, or they might be touchscreen. Push the buttons and cast your vote that way. Well, whatever that precinct-level machine is, it's going to pass data over to the county's one computer that counts all the votes across the whole county. That's called the central tabulator. We're going to be talking about it again, so you need to know this. The central tabulator in the Diebold environment is a database management process, which most, as far as I know, all of them are. The whole idea of counting votes, it's a database kind of a function. Well, you could look at the data with the Diebold provided program called GEMS, Global Election Management Software. There's Global again, even though it's Diebold now. You look at the data with GEMS and it looks secure. There's an audit trail that tracks what you do. There's a login password for security. It looks all right. However, the data is actually stored in a format called Microsoft Jet Database. Well, the Microsoft Jet Database can also be looked at in a copy of Microsoft Access. So basically, if you open up the same database of votes and election setups. It's got all the precincts in it. The candidate names, all that happy stuff is in this one big data file. Database, I should say. You look at that with a copy of Microsoft Access, and all of the alleged security features vanish. I don't mean they're limited in some way. I mean they're gone. No password to get in. You can tamper with the audit log, strip things in and out if you want. There's a great video I'll link below called the infamous Baxter video. At one point, Bev Harris, head of black box voting, and still the grand old dame of this whole movement. I consider myself one of her early lieutenants, and still am. Somehow, she hired a monkey trainer to take a monkey, specifically a juvenile chimpanzee, and teach it to modify a Diebold database. Well, they use Microsoft Access, and they managed to teach a chimpanzee how to delete entries in the audit log, which Diebold had claimed could be modified by no human being, hence the stunt with the monkey, okay? It's only a minute and a half, it's hilarious, but I'll link to it below, the Baxter video. Okay. So, one of the first things we found, we start going out to counties armed with this information. We started, because we got a hold of some of these live data files, and we pulled them up in Access, and we could play with them. We knew what was going on with it. So we start going out into counties, and we start looking on their computers. Everywhere we looked, we found Microsoft Access, which was never approved as a voting system tool of any sort. Shouldn't have been there. Known burglary tool for elections, but it appeared everywhere, all over the damn place. And this is part of a trend I'm going to go into here. As I talk, you're going to see case after case after case where I was certain, and you're going to be pretty rapidly convinced, that shady stuff of some sort was going on in the election. However, finding this shady stuff, finding copies of Microsoft Access, and sometimes much worse, as we'll get into, that's why we're going to talk for an hour, didn't change anything. People would go to court and say, Judge, look, hey, the election is insecure, illegal. It contained all kinds of unapproved processes, uncertified this, and security nightmare that. 6 ways from Sunday. Well, we're going to go into some of them. And the judge would go, well, unless you can show a specific number of votes flipped to change the outcome of a particular election, bye-bye, go away. So when we get to solutions for this, and we're going to do that at the end, keep that problem in mind, okay? All right, let's talk specific cases where we found problems. 2004, Bev Harris was monitoring an election in King County, Washington. Well, Washington State's one of these states is dominated by the politics of one county, King County, which is aka Seattle. And so as Seattle goes, if you've got something like a closely contested governor's race, that's how that it's the whole shooting matches in King County. On election night, she's there when the polls close it might have been 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, whatever it was. When the polls close, they immediately release a who's winning and losing report based on the mail-in votes that they've already scanned, but allegedly, and we're going to get to this, did not look at how that vote was going. They hadn't pushed the button to find out who's winning and losing yet, allegedly. But right at the polls close, they release, okay, based on the mail-in vote, it's going like this. Here's who's winning and losing in various races. So about every 15 minutes to half an hour, something like that, as votes come in from the precincts in big batches, they would release another report. Normal so far. And Bev collected them all. Kept them. After the election was all over, a day or two later, she files a public records request for the audit log, among other things. Print out the audit log. Let's see what was in there. Who did what to the election? Who loaded what? Okay, public records. She gets it, and there's a 3-hour block of time missing where nothing happened. And she says to the election managers, hey, it's busy election night, but from this time, from point in time to that point in time, nothing happened. What's up? Oh, well, nothing happened. And she says, you're a liar. I know you're a liar, because I kept the printouts, time and date stamped printouts, of the who's winning and losing report, called a summary of votes cast, I believe it is, SOVC. I kept all of them. And guess what? When one of those gets printed, it produces an audit log entry. Oops. So, somebody went in and purged a whole bunch of information from the middle of the election like a shotgun blast. God only knows what else they did to that. But at a minimum, they did some gems hacking. They did with Microsoft Access, most likely. It's like a game of Clue, you know? The elections officer in the server room with a copy of Microsoft Access. Who killed the election? Yeah. Okay. So that's one thing to look for. You look at the audit log, you look at the databases left over from an election, and you try and figure out if anything got tampered with. I keep actually accidentally putting my hand in the camera view. My apologies. Other things we have seen. I caught a good one in 2006, Memphis, which is it was city of Memphis, but it's got some other county name I don't even remember. Tennessee. Great. So I pull up this time the audit log, all the usual stuff, but I also grabbed something called the Windows Event Log. The Windows Event Log is the Microsoft Windows auditing function. It doesn't show a lot, but it does show when a new program was loaded into the central tabulator. Well, remember what I said about certified software? I was looking for uncertified software. What I found was something called jdsecure.exe loaded just right at a critical moment before election started. What's that? Well, it's the encryption software that goes with a Lexar jump drive USB memory stick. You've seen the little USB memory stick plugins go on the side of the computer, you put stuff onto it. So somebody was putting stuff in and out of the election machine, the central tabulator, on a memory stick that they password protected the contents of. I wonder why they would do that. Maybe they were taking a copy of the database off of the central tabulator, hacking the bejesus out of it somewhere else, and putting the hacked copy of the database back onto the server. That would be about my first guess. But at a minimum, JD Secure is not legal as an election system component. Remember, even if something is commercial off the shelf, COTS, you still have to do functionality and security testing of the whole system, including the COTS pieces. So you may not be able to look at the source code of how something like JD Secure, for example, would work, but you would have to look at the functionality of the overall system with JD Secure. Nobody did that. So that was absolutely illegal to have anywhere near that machine. Bad intent was going on. Almost certainly. Count on it. I'll tell you another one from Memphis. Oh, this is a good one. Okay, something Bev Harris caught a few years later. And this wasn't with the voting system. This is with the voter registration database. You're going to love this one. So, voter registration databases do not need to be held in the same security as the main election count systems, which is stupid, because if you hack the voter registration database, you're messing with who can vote or not, or at a minimum, who can vote conveniently. Okay, you mess with voter registration data, a lot of people are going to show up at the polls and going to be told, wait a minute, you've already voted. No, I didn't. So they vote provisionally and then it gets thrown out or something. Or, you're not a registered voter at all. Yes, I am. Well, we can have you vote provisionally. Maybe you can prove it later. Maybe you'll bother, maybe you won't. But at a minimum, we'll shave a certain number of votes out from the kind of voter we don't like by playing with the voter registration database. So she's looking at that system. She finds instances of somebody's first name being something completely normal. Tom, Dick, Harry, whatever, Mary, whatever. But last name of 0. Goose egg. I mean, numeric 0. And she says, what the heck is that all about? So she pulls up the paper voter registration systems. Voter registration records, I should say. And tries to figure out, what voter is that that's got a last name of 0? She figured it out. It's people who had the last name, family name of null, N-U-L-L. Now, some of you who are more technical bent are right now going, some of you aren't. Let me explain why you should be looking like this. Somebody forgot to sanitize their database inputs. What are you talking about, Jim? Okay. You're a data entry clerk. You got a stack of paper forms right beside you with people's voter registration data, and you're supposed to type it in, right? So you're going to go over here, and you're going to say Jim Simpson. Well, first name James. Second field, last name Simpson. Okay? Typically that's how you do it. You put the address, and you put the party affiliation details, if there's one, or whatever. You all the normal voter registration stuff. It's supposed to process each of those pieces of information as data and not programming. Remember, this too, just like the main vote counting systems, is a database function, and it has the ability to take in structured query language, SQL, which is a programming language specific to databases. Care to guess what the word null means in SQL speak? Yeah, 0. Okay? So the fact that these people's last names are showing up as a 0 means that the place where you put the data, in my case, for example, last name Simpson, you put it right there, it's supposed to be limited to being just data, not programming. If it's able to accept programming at that point, then somebody who's a seriously adept enough geek who gets a job as a data entry clerk has total control of the data. Oops. Whoops. Can probably bypass the audit log too. There's a comic strip author on the web named Ralph Monroe who writes a comic strip called XKCD. You can Google, I'll let you Google it. Google XKCD and Little Bobby Tables. It's the story of a young hacker mother who decides to name her child normal first name, normal last name, but maliciously destructive command sequence in SQL for a middle name. It includes the words drop tables. Okay, so one day the school calls the mother and says, "Why did you name your kid that? And why has that destroyed our entire database of votes?" And she says, "Well, you should sanitize your data inputs." Which means you should program the place where you put the kid's name, or the voter's name, or whatever. You should structure it so that it is pure data and not read as a program. Oops. Follow? So, voter registration systems with no sanitized data inputs. That's bad news. God knows how many different people, clerks at the DMV, you've got clerks at the Secretary of State's office, people with little or no security credentials or whatever, doing what's supposed to be simple data entry, except they've got total control over the voter registration database. Because they can put programs in where the data is supposed to be, which they're allowed to put data in. They're not supposed to put programs in, but nobody's stopped them. Oops. In a few cases, they'll put that voter registration stuff on the web, allowing users from home to check their data in the voter registration database through their own web browser. Wonder if those data inputs are sanitized or not. Because if they're not, yeah, some asshole from the GRU is sitting in Moscow playing with your voter registration database. Oops. By the way, my hair is wet because I had to take a shower at the end of a very hard day trucking today. So if you see wet hair, it happens. What other crazy stuff have we seen? Okay, I'll give you a few. So, the single dirtiest election I ever saw in my life was Pima County, Arizona. Election in 2006 called the RTA, Regional Transportation Authority, $2 billion bond measure. Was put up to a vote of the people. It had failed 4 or 5 times before. It was part of the run-up to the housing bubble. They wanted to massively expand the road system so they could keep on building more and more houses, even though anybody who'd ever heard of the tulip bubble crash of the 1600s knows that bubble economies eventually pop. Well, they sure did. Late 2007, I believe it was. All went poof. Okay, so the whole RTA thing was a disaster from start to finish. But the election in which it allegedly passed a vote, dirtiest one I've ever seen. When I first went to Pima County brought in by other activists to check out what was going on, I flew in the first time. Go from the airport right down to the county elections office, and I'm looking at the room where they keep the central tabulators behind glass. Oh, it's all pretty and nice. And what do I see? A bright blue Ethernet cable, basically a data cable, running right from the central tabulator over to the wall, over to a door, under the door, and out into some area of their office space that was completely opaque. No doorway, no nothing. Just says the election manager, hey, you want to open the door on the other side of there and let's follow that cable and see where it goes? Oh no, that's secure. No, I don't want to do that. Okay, so you are retaining the right to backdoor the database, and while everything is going on here that looks perfectly reasonable, somebody could be 20 feet away on the other end of a piece of cable doing whatever they want to the database, and there's nothing I can do about it, huh? Yeah, not good. Come to find out that one of the tricks around that county is they were printing out copies of the who's winning and losing data based on the mail-in vote, which they would start processing up to a week to 10 days before election day. They were peeking into who's winning and losing. Well, that's a huge problem right there, because you could take that data down to, let's say, the Democratic Party chair or the Republican Party chair, whoever's your buddy, it doesn't matter. You take it down to the county party chair, and if he knows 5 days before election day, based on the best polling data possible, actual live no-joke votes from all over the county, he now knows who's winning and losing. So he can order resources, people, campaign people to knock on doors, money, advertising budget, whatever. He can order them polled from the races he's losing big and the races he's winning big, and he can pile them up on the close races. And he can swing some races that way. That's a problem. If that isn't enough, somebody in the county election staff can play literal Vegas gambling, make a ton of money with actual live vote data, because you can actually gamble on who's winning and losing elections. You can go to Vegas and gamble on that. Little known fact. So, there's two things Pima County was doing wrong. The craziest thing they were doing wrong was definitely tampering with the vote. Here's how I know that. And this is, by the way, the main local activist in the Tucson, Pima County area is John Brakey. He's still around there. As the last I heard, he's still in the fight. Okay, good guy. So Brakey was poking at this database one day, because we got a whole copy of the database after a massive public records fight in court. Oh, good Lord. Big, huge brawl. We get a hold of the database, and we find, Brakey found, I'll just tell you right out, Brakey's a master at spotting weird things in big piles of data. He's got that kind of brain. He finds that there's a part of the database that records when a precinct's worth of votes get uploaded into the central tabulator. You follow me? He found instances where it was loaded multiple times. Sometimes 2, sometimes 3 or 4, in a few cases up to 6 times. Somebody was tampering with the data before it ever got to the central tabulator, when it was on the memory pack that came out of the precinct, messing around with the contents, re-uploading a copy. Then, when we got a judge, when we found this, we went to court again. I can't remember how many cases we fought. I'm not even going to guess. It was 3, 4, 5, something in there. So we go to court again, and we say, Judge, we need to look at the actual paper ballots from this election, pull them out of long-term storage, and we need to pull from the boxes, not just the piles of paper votes, I know you won't let us count them because of some state law. Okay, fine. But in those boxes are slips that were printed by the precinct voting machines at the end of the day that show the vote counts that the poll workers signed. Okay, we need to see the signed poll worker end of day slips from each of the precinct voting machines. Okay, so we get these huge pile of boxes, we're pouring through them, and in a lot of cases, the signed poll tape from the end of the day, the end of day report from the precinct, was missing. And there was an enormous correlation between a precinct that had been uploaded multiple times and somebody threw away the signed poll tape. Okay, so yeah, I know that election was hacked. I know. There ain't no question in my mind. Oh, what are some others? God, there's so many. There's so many. The upshot is that you can look through the electronic debris from the election. You can look at things like the Windows event log and look for uncertified programs. You can go through the main electronic database, and you can find 6 kinds of screwball stuff. You can go through the actual paper records from the end of day at each precinct, and you can find records that haven't been thrown away, the critical signed poll tapes from the poll workers thrown out. But if it's months or years after the election, there ain't a court in the land right now that's going to fix it. Okay, I talked for just over 30 minutes. Maybe this isn't going to go an hour, so I've had a little bit of time to gather my thoughts on this. I'm actually going to close it up fairly quickly. Let me run a few concepts by you. Why has this problem persisted for so long when we've caught so many nefarious instances of problems? Why is it still going on? Well, I have a couple theories about that. 2 big ones. 1, all of the activism and energy and money to support election reform. Oh, I'm going to tell you one more story. It's a good one. Hold on for that. But all of the activism and money and energy to reform elections rises to a crescendo typically about 5 months before the day of the general election. Now, this next election might happen earlier because finally people are going to start paying attention to the primaries, but even by then it's too late. Okay? You have to lay the legal groundwork to rapidly get the public records you need on election night, after the polls close, obviously. You need the structure in place to quickly analyze what's going on within a 5-day window, which is your challenge period to the election. If you don't have that structure in place as something you've worked up the food chain in the court system, preferably to the Supreme Court, to establish a basic right for the public or civic groups to oversee elections or to help oversee elections. Until you have that framework in place, you're not going to get anywhere. Because then, when a particular election goes down that looks funky, when the outcome of the vote is just 6 kinds of squirrely, and the election officials are acting like a bunch of lunatics, if you've got to go in and establish your right to even look at what's going on, it takes months, maybe years. Then you finally find out what's going on, or that there is at least shady stuff going on. Well, it's too late. It's too late. You're toast. Okay? So, this all leads me to my second point. Well, one is we need continuous funding for election oversight and election court action. We need to establish basic civil rights to oversee the conduct of the election and to have a fair election. And when we show strong evidence that there is not a fair election, we need to be able to go to court and say, hey, based on this precedent that one of us took all the way to the top, all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, based on this, you need to cry foul, and we're going to redo this election. Until you have the basic civil rights to a proper, fair election established at the highest levels of the courts, we're not going to get anywhere. Nothing will happen. Until the entire country's economy and political structure completely collapse, and then we all get together and sit down and rethink how it all works. And I hope it doesn't come to that, because if it does, the financial hit on all of us will be horrendous. We're talking another Great Depression at that point. So that's my theory. We need year after year serious funding to fund targeted court action that establishes basic civil rights. The example I would give is the gun folk, of all people, the gun nut community, if you will, which is not just the NRA. By the way, the people who in the gun rights community that have won the biggest have not been NRA. They've been connected with something called the Second Amendment Foundation, and a particular lawyer named Alan Gura is involved in a lot of this stuff. He's the guy, and that's the organization that funded him, that went to the U.S. Supreme Court twice, once in 2008, once in 2010, the Heller case and McDonald case. Now there's another batch of gunfolk working off of those successes going to the U.S. Supreme Court now. They have one case that's been certified for review by the Supreme Court either later this year or very early next year. But the gunfolk are going back to the Supreme Court, and they're going to win again. They're going to win because they are targeting specific things they want to accomplish in terms of social change. Now, you may not agree with what their idea of social change is. You may not agree. Fine. But you got to respect their commitment and their dedication and their willingness to follow through, both with money and planning and legal theory and structured cases from beginning to end. Until the election integrity movement gets to that point, I ain't going to get anywhere. So far, what's been going on is every once in a while we'll get a big donor who makes a big splash for a while and kicks a lot of money around. That happens sometimes. But when it does, that person with the money will then direct the strategy, and often don't know what the heck they're doing. No clue. Seen that time and time again. Been working this issue since 2003. I know what I'm talking about. They have to find and trust some top lawyers who know how to push social change all the way to the top. Let me give you a couple of things I saw all the time in elections. I would go into a particular election agency and I would ask for the simplest thing I could possibly think of to prove that that election has some integrity behind it. I would say, could you please, you do it, walk up to the central tabulator, pull open a command line. It's easy to do in Windows. Pull open what we used to call a DOS prompt, the letter C, greater than generally, and type the following words: ping space www.google.com. And ping, all it does is send and receive a few bytes of data to see if you've got a connection to the Google corporate office. You could pick anywhere. You could pick www.bbc.com, CBS, it doesn't matter. But Google is the one we traditionally use because they're the biggest and they're most likely to have a server up to answer you. All right? And only one of two possible things is going to happen. What you want to have happen is connection refused or not found or something. There is no connection because the machine's not on the internet. That's what you want. And if it says, 64 bytes transmitted, received, it took this long, and a few lines of that, oops, that's a problem. Well, almost every time I ever walked into an election office, I said, will you do me a favor, walk up to the server, pull up a console and ping Google. Ping space, www.google.com. Oh no, that's some unsecured, untested security procedure, and we're not going to go change our procedures. It's like, no, bullshit. They had a freaking internet connection running. And they didn't want to admit it. Okay? One county, and I'll name them, good one. And I mean that in a positive light. San Luis Obispo County, 2007. I walked in there and I was talking to their head election tech. And I says, hey, do me a favor. You walk up to the console and ping Google. Ping space, www.google.com. Oh, sure, no problem. Connection refused 4 times. What'd you expect? Hey, awesome. Another hallmark of what I saw in his office is it's not a big elections department. It's not that big a county, but not terribly small either. I mean, they've got some people around. So he had his central tabulator over on one side of a room, and then just a little ways away is a table where he had all his other election components. So he had, for example, a precinct voting machine that he would upload memory packs with, the usual parts of a system. And all the wiring was right there, not 1 inch of it hidden away from view. You could look at it and you could say, yeah, that wire, legally, properly, goes from that central tabulator computer over to that table. It hits a little 4-port hub, splits it 4 ways, and goes to that part which is certified, that part which is certified, and then there's an extra port you're not using, fine. But you can see the whole thing. You can see that nobody else is connecting into it and backdooring the whole thing. Awesome. Folks, I only saw that once. Do you understand me? Only once did I see that level of transparency and professional. I mean, he did some other good things too. I didn't see any superior mistake at all. The guy was running an honest shop. You could tell. I only saw it once. And that pisses me off. Not San Luis Obispo, obviously. Good God, no. In fact, I wrote a glowing report and I gave a copy to his boss, etc. Okay? But I only saw that once. What do we do? Okay, if you're fighting this issue, if you got court things coming up, let me tell you the first thing you do. Write a public records request to NIST, National Institute of Science and Technology. Why? Because as the bad PR became more and more evident from the test labs failing in their jobs, and there were cases where they gave testimony before a committee of the California Senate, for example, state Senate, and they were asked all kinds of questions that I helped prepare for some legislators to ask. I fed the legislators some questions to ask them, and they failed bad. Man, 2 of them just went, had no idea what they're doing. So as things like that started to happen, at some point, somebody accidentally had 2 neurons spark at the same time and say, we need to have these test labs looked at. So they put NIST in charge of certifying test labs. Now, they threw some test labs out for poor performance, and then they let them back in conditionally. There is a stack of letters to this effect regarding the test labs. Wiley, Metamore, Cyber Inc., SysTest, and some others. These are the names of the test labs. Ask them for every document they've got on the test labs, all of them. Okay? These are the approved voting system certification labs. The list includes Cyber Inc., Metamore, Metamor, I can't remember if there's an E on it, sorry. Cyber, I mentioned. SysTest, SYSTEST. There was another one, this is a funny story, iBeta was one of the test labs. Lowercase I, uppercase B, ETA. They were the only lab that actually did a halfway decent job. They blew the whistle on one voting system vendor called AVS, I think it was, or something like that. 3 letters starts with an A. They blew the whistle on a lab. I'm sorry. On a voting machine vendor. The lab blew the whistle on a voting machine vendor. Only time I know of this ever happened. This one small vendor had one certified product, but they had multiple revisions of the innards. And when they changed the entire guts of the machine, they didn't bother to recertify anything. And iBeta caught wind of this and blew the whistle and got them thrown out of the voting machine business. But they weren't a big player anyway, thank God. Okay. So iBeta, oh, you're going to love this part. Their main stock in trade, what they normally did testing for was video games. They were the best of the test labs. 2010, I believe it was, they quit. I believe they wrote a letter saying, hey, this is a total fiasco, we're not getting involved no more. Most of the other labs I just mentioned, Wiley, W-Y-L-E, yeah, as in Wile E. Coyote, they're about that stupid. Metamore and Cyber. I believe Cyber Inc. used to be Metamore or vice versa. There was a change in name. So we're really talking about two, Wiley and some other jerks. Based in Huntsville, Alabama. Now, why were they in Huntsville, Alabama? Because their normal stock in trade was examining the software for ICBM guidance systems at the Redstone National Arsenal and other military aerospace projects. So I hope, for the love of God, they test ICBM control systems better than they test voting systems, because they suck at testing voting systems. Them and SysTest, a bunch of pack idiots. Now, there may be some other idiots that have joined that business since I was last majorly active in late 2012, early 2013. For family reasons, I meant turning into a trucker. Folks, there's a problem here. But if you're trying to challenge the constitutionality of the entire test lab structure, the place to start is with the failings of the test lab, and the place to go for that is NIST. If you ask for those records, I might find somebody at NIST is going to go, oh, thank God, somebody's finally looking at this. Who's got a court case? That's one of the places to look. But we have to establish basic civil rights in this area. It's vital. And that means we have to fund it on something other than an election-to-election emergency cycle. I've talked long enough. Jim Simpson signing off. Thank you.